You know exactly what you should do. That is the thing. You are not here because you lack information. You are not here because nobody has explained the dynamic to you, or because you do not understand avoidant attachment, or because the psychology is still unclear. You understand it, probably better than most people in your life understand their own relationships. You could articulate the defense mechanisms and the deactivating strategies, and the intermittent reinforcement and the architectural reality of why closeness feels like threat to them. You understand all of it, and then the moment arrives. The specific, loaded, everything you know competing with everything you feel moment, where the understanding was supposed to produce the right behavior, and you go soft, not dramatically, not in a way that looks like failure from the outside. In the quiet, specific, this time is different way that has produced the same result every previous time. The standard that was clear becomes negotiable. The line that was drawn gets moved. The version of yourself that was grounded and forward-moving and genuinely not organized around their availability briefly, thoroughly, becomes the version that is giving one more chance, making one more accommodation, explaining one more time why your needs are legitimate, waiting one more week to see if something shifts, and something in you knows, even as it is happening, that the softness is not generosity, that the accommodation is not patience, that the explaining is not communication, that all of it is the old pattern reasserting itself in the specific moment that the new pattern was supposed to hold. This is that conversation, the one about being ruthless. And before you decide you already know what ruthless means in this context, you probably do not. Because the ruthless that actually works is not what most people think it is when they hear the word. It is not coldness. It is not cruelty. It is not the hardened, defended, nobody gets through quality of someone who has decided that the solution to being hurt by softness is to eliminate the softness entirely. It is something more precise than any of that, and more powerful and more permanently yours once you understand what it actually is. Why you keep going soft at the wrong moment, not as criticism, as diagnosis. Because the going soft is not random. It follows a pattern that is as consistent and as psychologically explicable as everything about the avoidance behavior that you have spent all this time understanding. The difference is that this pattern is yours, and yours is the one you have the most control over. The going soft happens at the specific moments when the cost of holding becomes acute enough to activate the fear that the holding is going to cost you everything. Not the abstract everything, the specific everything. This person, this connection, the version of things that the best moments promised and the in-between kept just available enough to keep the promise alive. In those moments, the ruthlessness, the standard, the line, the boundary, collides with the attachment, and the attachment is older and louder and more physically present than the standard. The standard lives in the prefrontal cortex. The attachment lives in the body, and the body wins in the moment of collision almost every time, unless something specific has been built that allows the prefrontal cortex to participate before the body has already acted. That something specific is what this conversation is building. But first, the diagnosis needs to be complete, because the going soft is not only about the attachment. It has another layer underneath it that is worth naming. It is about the story you have been telling yourself about what the softness means, the story that frames the accommodation as compassion, the explaining as clarity, the standard moving as patience, the line drawing and then line moving as the reasonable flexibility of someone who understands that growth is non-linear and people are complicated, and the situation deserves more nuance than a rigid adherence to what you said you needed. That story is sophisticated. It uses the language of the understanding, the attachment theory, the psychology, the compassion for the avoidance wounds, as the justification for the behavior that the understanding was supposed to prevent. It is the most expensive story you are telling yourself because it makes the going soft feel like wisdom. And wisdom is very difficult to argue with in the moment. You are not being wise when you go soft at the wrong moment. You are being afraid that the ruthlessness will cost you the connection, afraid that the standard held will produce the loss, afraid that the line drawn will be the thing that finally confirms what the fear has always suspected, that your needs are actually too much, that holding the standard is actually the problem, that the accommodation was actually the only thing keeping the connection from collapsing entirely. That fear is the installation, still running, in the specific moment of collision form that produces the softness, that produces the result that the softness has always produced. The ruthlessness is the practice of acting from a different place than the fear, not despite the fear, through it, with the fear present and acknowledged and not in charge. What ruthless actually means. The first definition, ruthless with your standards. This is the first and most foundational meaning, and it requires being precise about what a standard actually is in this context, because the word gets used in ways that range from the useful to the punitive, and the useful version is the only one worth talking about. A standard is not a rule you impose on someone else. It is a description of what you require to be fully present in a relationship, not what you want, what you require. The distinction matters because wants are negotiable and requirements are not. You might want them to be more expressive or more available or more consistent in ways that exceed what is actually required for your genuine okayness in the relationship. Those wants are real and worth knowing, but they are not the standard. The standard is the floor, the minimum below which the relationship does not have what it needs to function as a relationship rather than as the specific, costly, consuming thing it has been. Below the floor, you are not in a relationship. You are in the management of a dynamic that is using the language and the emotional texture of a relationship without the structural reality of one. Being ruthless with your standards means knowing exactly where the floor is, specifically, concretely, in behavioral terms rather than in the vague language of, I need to feel valued or I need more consistency, and not moving it, not for the compelling explanation of why this particular instance is an exception, not for the genuine feeling underneath the behavior that falls below the floor, not for the compassionate understanding of why the floor is difficult for them to meet, not for the fear that holding the floor will cost the connection. The floor is the floor, not because you are rigid, because below it you are not okay. And you being not okay is not a variable that is available for negotiation in the service of someone else's comfort with the dynamic. The specific ruthlessness here is in the not moving, the holding of the floor at the moment of collision, when the attachment and the fear and the sophisticated story about patience and flexibility are all generating maximum pressure to move it one more time. One more time has been the dynamic's entire operating history. One more time is how the floor got to where it currently is, further below your actual requirements than it was at the beginning, moved incrementally by every instance of compassionate flexibility that the story told you was wisdom. No more one more times. The floor is where it is. That is ruthless with your standards, not cruel, not punitive, just honest about what you actually require, and unwilling to pretend otherwise in the service of keeping something that is not meeting your requirements. What ruthless actually means. The second definition, ruthless with your attention. This one is more subtle and more immediately actionable than the first because it operates in the daily, ordinary texture of the dynamic rather than only in the moments of acute collision. Your attention is the most valuable thing you have, not in the abstract sense of attention as a philosophical resource, in the concrete, practical sense of where your cognitive and emotional processing goes. What you think about, what you analyze, what you monitor, what you plan around, what you check, what you hope about. For the duration of this dynamic, your attention has been predominantly allocated to them, to the relationship, to the management of the hope and the reading of the behavior and the assessment of the evidence and the calibration of your own responses and the maintenance of the conditions and the monitoring of whether any of it is working. That allocation is not neutral. It has a cost. The cost is everything else that your attention was supposed to be on and was not. Your own life, your own development, your own forward motion, your own relationships with people who are not organized around an escape hatch, your own genuine, unmonitored for their benefit enjoyment of the experience of being you in the world. Being ruthless with your attention means treating it as the finite, precious, non-renewable resource it actually is, and deciding, not once, as a decision that gets revisited every time the avoidant does something that reactivates the allocation, but as an ongoing, daily practiced orientation, where it goes, not to them as the primary recipient, not to the management of the dynamic as the default use of your processing capacity, to your life, to what is actually in front of you, to the people and the work and the interests and the directions that are actually available and actually present and actually capable of returning the investment of your attention, rather than consuming it indefinitely, without return. This ruthlessness feels like indifference from the outside. It is not indifference. It is the accurate allocation of a resource that has been systematically misallocated by the dynamic. Taking your attention back and directing it appropriately is not the withdrawal of care. It is the end of the misallocation that the dynamic was running. And what happens when you are ruthless with your attention? When you stop allocating it to the management of something that is not meeting your requirements, is that your life comes back, gradually, specifically in the texture of days that are actually inhabited rather than partially inhabited, while the real processing happens elsewhere. The things that were always there become visible again. The people who were always available become reachable again. The forward motion that was always possible becomes actual rather than theoretical. That life, fully attended to, genuinely inhabited, not organized around the management of the dynamic, is both the product of the ruthlessness and the fuel for it. Because a life that is genuinely full is harder to leave for the management of something that is not meeting your requirements. The ruthlessness becomes more sustainable the more the life it is making room for becomes real. What ruthless actually means, the third definition, ruthless with your narrative. This is the one that operates most quietly and does the most damage when it is not addressed. Because the narrative is where everything lives before it becomes behavior. The story you are telling yourself about the dynamic, about them, about what is happening, and why, and what it means, and what it requires of you. That story is the operating system, and the operating system has been corrupted by the installation and the sophisticated justifications and the compassion-framed accommodations into something that is producing outputs that do not serve you. Being ruthless with your narrative means examining the story with the specific, honest, not the installation running clarity that the undoing makes possible. Not the story you tell other people, the one that has been edited for palatability or for the avoidance of having to explain the full complexity of the dynamic to someone who has not been inside it. The story you tell yourself, in the quiet, in the processing. What is the story actually saying? Is it saying that the dynamic is evidence of a real, significant, worth the cost connection that is genuinely developing towards something with sufficient patience and the right conditions? Or is it saying that the dynamic has been producing the same results for long enough that patience has become the framing for what is actually the indefinite suspension of your life pending someone else's readiness? Is it saying that the accommodation is the compassionate, psychologically informed response to the avoidance wounds? Or is it saying that the accommodation is what the installation produces when the fear of holding the standard collides with the attachment to the connection? Is it saying that the explaining is the honest communication that a relationship requires? Or is it saying that the explaining is the version of the argument that is still organized around being heard through a channel that was specifically designed to prevent the hearing? Those distinctions between the story the narrative presents and the story the honest assessment reveals are where the ruthlessness does its most important work, not in the dramatic moments of collision. In the quiet, daily processing space where the narrative runs unchecked and produces the orientation that shows up as behavior in the moments of collision, being ruthless with the narrative means not letting the sophisticated justifications run unchallenged, not letting the compassion-framed accommodation present itself as wisdom without the honest examination of what it is actually producing, not letting the explaining present itself as communication without the honest examination of whether the channel it is going through is capable of receiving it. Every time the narrative offers the sophisticated justification for the softness, the ruthlessness asks one question: what has this produced? Not what is it supposed to produce. Every previous time this specific story ran and produced this specific behavior, what was the outcome? If the outcome was the same, the floor moved, the standard negotiated, the explaining received with deflection, the attention remained allocated to the management of something not meeting the requirements, then the story is not wisdom, it is the installation, and the ruthlessness is the refusal to let the installation present itself as wisdom one more time. The ruthlessness as love here is where the reframe earns itself, because ruthless is a word that sits uncomfortably in the context of love. It implies a hardness that seems incompatible with the warmth and the depth and the genuine caring that has characterized everything about how you have been in this dynamic. The ruthlessness being described is not the absence of love. It is love's most honest expression, not the version of love that accommodates indefinitely in the hope that accommodation will produce the return it was hoping for. The version that knows what it is worth and where it belongs and refuses to locate itself permanently somewhere that cannot receive it. Ruthless with your standards is love for yourself. The specific, behavioral, this is what I require love that treats your own needs as legitimate rather than negotiable. That holds the floor not because you are punishing someone else, but because below the floor you are not okay. And you not being okay is not the love you have to offer. It is the absence of the conditions under which the love can actually be present. Ruthless with your attention is love for your life. The recognition that the life you have, the specific, unrepeatable, forward-moving, yours to inhabit life, deserves the primary allocation of your processing. That the people and the work and the growth and the genuine forward motion that are available to you deserve the attention that has been going to the management of something that is not meeting your requirements. Ruthless with your narrative is love for the truth, the commitment to seeing the dynamic and yourself in it, with the honest clarity that the installation and the sophisticated justifications have been obscuring. Not the brutal, self-critical clarity that would be the installation running in a different direction. The clean, accurate, neither self-flagellating nor self-exonerating clarity that allows you to see what is actually happening and respond to what is actually happening rather than to the story the fear is telling about what is happening. 3 ruthlessnesses, standards, attention, narrative, all of them expressions of love, for yourself, for your life, for the truth. None of them cruelty, none of them hardness, none of them the defended, nobody gets through quality that the word ruthless might initially suggest. Just clarity about what you require, where your attention belongs, and what the story is actually saying underneath the sophisticated justifications. That clarity, held consistently in the moments of collision, when the attachment and the fear and the installation are generating maximum pressure to move the floor one more time. That is ruthless. That is the whole thing. And it is the most loving thing you have ever brought to this dynamic, for yourself first, which is the only place it was ever supposed to start. So you have the 3 definitions now: ruthless with your standards, ruthless with your attention, ruthless with your narrative. You understand what each one means and what it looks like and why it is the expression of love, rather than the absence of it. And now comes the part that always follows the understanding, the part where the understanding meets the actual, daily, specific reality of being in the dynamic with another person who is not sitting still while you practice the ruthlessness, who is doing the specific things that avoidants do, the reaching and the warming and the small vulnerable moments and the indirect future references and the genuine feeling arriving through every channel except the direct one, that make the ruthlessness feel, in the moment of its practice, less like clarity and more like cruelty, because the ruthlessness is easy in the abstract, in the framework, in the quiet of your own processing, where the fear is not acute and the attachment is not activated, and the specific pull of this specific person is not present in real time. In the abstract, the floor is clear, and the attention belongs to your life, and the narrative is honest, and the whole thing makes obvious, unambiguous sense. And then the moment arrives, and the abstract becomes the specific. And the specific is always harder than the abstract by exactly the amount that the attachment exceeds the understanding. So this is the conversation about the specific, about what happens in the actual moments, about what the ruthlessness looks like when it is being practiced rather than understood, about what you do with the feelings that the practice produces, and about the difference between the ruthlessness that is actually working and the ruthlessness that is the performance of ruthlessness that collapses the moment the pressure becomes real. The moment the ruthlessness gets tested, it will not arrive when you are ready. The moments that test the ruthlessness have a specific quality of arriving at maximum inconvenience, when your resources are lowest, when the grief that the ruthlessness generates has been most recently acute, when the specific quality of the connection, the realness of it, the specific irreplaceability of what exists between you is most vivid and most present. In that moment, the ruthlessness meets its actual test, not the theoretical test of whether you understand it, the lived test of whether you can hold it when everything that was conditioned by this relationship is generating pressure to release it. The test arrives in a specific form. Almost always, the avoidant does something that is genuinely real, not performed, not strategic in the conscious sense, genuinely real. A moment of actual vulnerability, an expression of the caring that has been operating through indirect channels, suddenly finding something closer to a direct form, a reaching that carries more weight than the minimum viable contact that maintains the hook, something that feels, because it is, like movement. And the ruthlessness is supposed to hold in the face of that movement, which feels, in the moment, less like wisdom and more like refusing to receive something real, because you have committed to a practice that does not distinguish between the hook and genuine change. This is the most important distinction in the entire practice of the ruthlessness, and it is the one that requires the most honest, most careful, most not filtered through the fear assessment. The ruthlessness is not supposed to be indiscriminate. It is not a wall that nothing gets through regardless of its quality. That version of the ruthlessness is the defended nobody gets through hardness. That was explicitly not what was being described. That version protects you from everything, including the genuine movement that the ruthlessness was supposed to create the conditions for. The ruthlessness is supposed to be precise, specific, directed at the particular things, the floor moving, the attention misallocating, the narrative corrupting, that have been producing the results that the ruthlessness is addressing. It is not directed at genuine movement. It does not hold the standard against evidence of the standard being met. It does not misallocate attention away from something that is genuinely returning the investment. It does not maintain the narrative of nothing has changed in the face of actual evidence of change. The distinction is everything, and making it accurately requires the honest assessment that the undoing makes possible. The clear, evidence-based, not filtered through fear or hope assessment of what is actually in front of you. Is this the hook, the minimum viable warmth that reactivates the investment without constituting genuine architectural change? The feeling arriving through the direct channel for the first time because the indirect channels have failed to restore the access, and the escalation is the system's response to the failed minimum viable contact? Or is this movement the specific, behavioral pattern over time evidence of something actually shifting? The accountability that sustains itself, the consistency that builds, the directness that is not the product of maximum pressure, but the natural emergence of someone who has done real work on the fear that the directness was protecting against. That assessment, made honestly, in the moment, without the fear filtering it toward the answer that relieves the anxiety of the ruthlessness, is the ruthlessness at its most precise, not the blanket holding of everything at arm's length, the specific, accurate, evidence-based determination of what is actually in front of you, and the response that corresponds to the actual assessment rather than to the fear's preferred conclusion. What the ruthlessness feels like when it is working, not comfortable, That needs to be named immediately and clearly because the discomfort of the ruthlessness is one of the primary reasons it keeps getting abandoned. People expect the ruthlessness to feel like empowerment, like clarity, like the specific satisfying quality of someone who has finally stepped into the grounded, forward-moving version of themselves, and the grounding feels solid and good. Sometimes it feels like that in the cleaner moments, when the fear is quiet and the attachment is not acutely activated, and the practice is flowing from genuine clarity rather than from the effort of maintaining clarity against the pressure of the fear. But in the moments that actually matter, the collision moments, the test of the ruthlessness moments, it feels like loss, like grief, like the specific physical weight of choosing your own flaw over the connection that exists below it, like the loneliness of holding something that the fear is screaming at you to release. That is what working ruthlessness feels like. Not comfortable, not empowered in the way the framework makes it sound. Heavy, real, costing something that is worth the cost but is nonetheless a cost. The ruthlessness that does not feel like anything, the version that is frictionless and easy and does not produce the grief of the holding, is usually not the ruthlessness. It is the numbness, the defended version, the wall that went up because the pain of the softness became unsustainable and the system found a way to stop feeling the cost. That version is not the practice. It is the avoidance of the practice wearing its clothing. Real ruthlessness feels like love doing the hardest thing love does, holding a boundary for the person you love, for yourself, which is the primary love this is about, in the face of everything that wants the boundary to come down. Feeling the full weight of what the boundary costs, without letting the weight collapse the boundary, grieving the release of the hope that the accommodation would eventually produce something different, while simultaneously continuing to move forward in the direction of the life that the ruthlessness is making room. Full, heavy, real, worth it, all three simultaneously. That is working ruthlessness. The three places the ruthlessness gets abandoned most often, because knowing them in advance is the closest thing to preparation available. The abandonment does not announce itself. It arrives dressed as something else, and knowing what it is dressed as when it arrives is the most practical thing this conversation can offer. The first is the pity ambush. The avoidant expresses something, vulnerability, pain, the specific quality of someone who is genuinely struggling with the absence that the ruthlessness created. And the pity activates, not the pity that is condescending or self-serving. The genuine, human, I do not want to be the source of this pain pity that comes from actually caring about someone. And the pity generates the compassion, and the compassion generates the accommodation, and the accommodation is framed again as the loving thing. The pity ambush is where the ruthlessness as love framing is most important, because the loving thing is not to relieve the pain of the absence by restoring the excess. The loving thing, for them, if their genuine growth is what you care about, and for yourself, because your flaw is your flaw regardless, is to let the absence be the absence until the evidence of genuine change is present. The pity is real. The compassion is real. Acting on them by moving the flaw is still the abandonment of the ruthlessness, regardless of how genuinely the compassion was felt. The second is the progress hallucination. Something happens that looks like movement, feels like movement, carries the specific quality of something genuinely different from what preceded it. And the hope, which has been waiting with remarkable patience for exactly this, activates and begins the construction of the evidence that the ruthlessness can now be safely released, because the standard is being met. The progress hallucination is the hope doing what the hope has always done, finding the evidence for the conclusion it was already building toward. The honest assessment of whether the movement is real requires the specific, deliberate, not filtered through hope examination of whether the behavior constitutes the pattern over time evidence of genuine change, or the temporary, pressure-produced warmth of the escalated reach that has historically been mistaken for progress. One instance of something better is not the pattern. One vulnerable moment is not the architectural shift. One reaching that felt more direct than the previous ones is not the evidence of the directness becoming the new baseline. The ruthlessness holds until the pattern is present. Not the moment, the pattern. The third is the exhaustion surrender. The ruthlessness is simply tiring. It costs daily. It generates grief. It requires the maintenance of something against significant internal and external pressure. And at some point, the exhaustion of the maintaining becomes greater than the pain of the releasing. And the surrender happens not from a place of genuine reassessment, but from a place of simply being too depleted to continue holding. The exhaustion surrender is the most insidious abandonment because it looks like giving up on a practice that was not working rather than what it actually is. Giving up on a practice that was working, but that was not being resourced adequately for the duration required. The resource for the ruthlessness is the life, the genuinely inhabited, attention returned to it, actually moving forward life that the ruthlessness is supposed to be making room for. When the life is real, when the forward motion is genuine and the attention is actually allocated to it, and the daily experience of being you is full enough to provide something other than the management of the dynamic. The ruthlessness has fuel. It is not only holding, it is also building something, and the building sustains the holding in a way that pure holding cannot sustain itself. When the life is not real, when the ruthlessness is being practiced in a vacuum, as a performance of forward motion without the genuine content, the exhaustion comes faster and the surrender comes more easily because there is nothing being built alongside the holding. There is only the cost of the holding without the corresponding growth in what the holding is making room for. The ruthlessness and the life are not separate practices. They are the same practice expressed in two directions simultaneously: the holding and the building, the no to what is not meeting the requirements, and the yes to what is genuinely yours, both every day. Neither sustainable without the other. What the ruthlessness eventually produces not immediately, not on the timeline the hope prefers, but actually in you, specifically and permanently. The ruthlessness practiced over time, imperfectly, with the abandonments and the resumptions and the nonlinear progression that genuine change always involves, produces a version of yourself that is qualitatively different from the version that entered the dynamic. The floor is real now. Not as a concept, as a behavioral reality that has been demonstrated across multiple instances of collision, where the pressure to move it was significant and it did not move. The floor being real means it is legible. To you and to anyone who encounters you in a relational context, it communicates without words that this is someone who knows what they require and does not negotiate the requirement when the negotiation would cost them. The attention is yours now, not entirely. You are human and the conditioning does not disappear completely, but substantially. The default allocation has shifted. Your life is the primary recipient of your processing. The management of someone else's dynamic is no longer the default use of your cognitive and emotional capacity. That shift is felt in the quality of your days, in the specific, gradually increasing aliveness of someone who is actually present in their own life, rather than partially present while the real attention is elsewhere. And the narrative is honest now, not brutally, self-critically honest, cleanly honest. The sophisticated justifications do not run unchallenged. The compassion-framed accommodations are visible as what they are, rather than as what they present themselves as. The story you tell yourself about what is happening and what it means and what it requires of you is closer to the truth than it was when the installation was running it. That version of you, the floor real, the attention yours, the narrative honest, is the version that the ruthlessness built, not the version that accommodated its way to a different outcome. The version that held what needed holding until the holding produced the change that only the holding could produce. In you, that is the primary change, the one that is guaranteed regardless of what the avoidant does or does not do, regardless of whether their realization produces contact or their architectural change produces the genuine shift, or the relationship becomes something different, or the relationship ends in the completion that the ruthlessness made possible. In you, the ruthlessness built something permanent, and yours and genuinely more capable of the love it was always trying to give, not to them only, to yourself first. And from that first, from that grounded, floor real, attention to yours, narrative honest place, the love that goes outward is different from what it was before. It is not conditional on being received. It is not contingent on the other person's architecture being available for it. It is not organized around the hope of eventually landing somewhere that can hold it. It is simply the full expression of a person who knows what they are worth, directed toward wherever it can actually land, without apology, without the prior management, without the editor that the installation built. Just love, ruthlessly itself, which was always the whole point. That is what the ruthlessness was for. That is what it built. That is what you are.